Welcome back, my lords and ladies, to the Cast Beyond the Wall. We are your guide to all things Westerosi, and we're here to bring you a review, analysis, and fan v fan debate on each episode of HBO's Game of Thrones successor series, House of the Dragon. In today's discussion, we're going to provide our initial review of House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 8, The Lord of the Tides, before providing a breakdown of the story. And then we'll close out the show by selecting this week's winners, this week's losers, and this week's best wild card player. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and Daniel, let me tell you, if I'm given a choice between my tongue and my head, I really don't know how I could go on without the tongue. I am a podcaster by trade. So I had to start thinking about if I was to lose my tongue in order to keep my life, what possible career could I take on but a mime? I've been working on the pantomiming this week since I watched the episode in fear that one day Daemon may come and take my tongue. Have you thought about any future career opportunities beyond podcasting?
No thoughts about being a mime. That's a new one. You're going to have to tell me how that goes for you, Caleb.
Daniel Stoll, my co-host from the Riverlands of Southern Illinois. Daniel, welcome back to the Cast Beyond the Wall.
Hey, it's Daniel Stoll. It's good to be back. And I have to say, Caleb, that while I haven't thought about being a mime, I have thought that if I'm ever in a room with Daemon, I'm not going to get on his bad side. When he sees a messenger, he kills him and he doesn't like it. He challenges someone, they answer that challenge, they die. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm on Daemon's side of the room no matter where I am. That way I get to keep my head and my tongue.
So you're Team Daemon all the way, not because you like him or you care about him, because you're just in constant fear that he's going to kill you.
I mean, I do like him, but that's also, a pretty high motivator of don't want to die.
Daniel, as always, a pleasure to have you back on, ever reliable co-host. Today, we're also joined by another exciting Lord of the Realm, first-time guest host on the Cast Beyond the Wall, actually. I'm so excited to welcome Chad Peresman, the principal and founder of Aider Communications. He's also a podcaster, fan of many things, fantasy, Disney, all the nerdy things. Chad, welcome to the Cast Beyond the Wall.
Hey, how you guys doing tonight? I'm gonna force myself to not choose. I'm just never visiting the Red Keep. That's ultimately what I've decided. I think it's just better. There's nothing there. I'm gonna do everything I can to, even if I have to get on that boat and go with them to King's Landing. I'm just being like, yeah, we'll catch up in Flea Bottom later on. No need to enter those gates for me.
It's okay. Everyone is allowed to take a sick day from time to time. Anytime you're scheduled for the Red Keep, you're just mysteriously sick. That seasickness from crossing the sea, I'm sure, is going to keep you out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna be like, let me go find a maester. I'll catch up with y'all later. I'm good.
That's the wisest way to play the games if you want to live, and that is just not to play.
I'd be like, I haven't seen the dragon pits yet. That feels safer to me than being in the Red Keep.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Chad, it's so excited to talk House of the Dragon with you. I had you on my film analysis podcast, the Cinematic Schematics Talk, Thor: Love and Thunder, a couple months back. And I'm glad that you're on board for House of the Dragon, because there was a period when I reached out to you where I myself was like, I'm going to try to do this podcast again, but we might end up hating the show. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, clearly you've at least watched as far as episode 8, but what have you thought of House of the Dragon on the whole so far this season?
Yeah, this feels a lot like season 1 of Game of Thrones to me, which is like, I feel compelled to watch it because everyone is talking about it and everyone is all of my geek and nerd podcast that I listen to, they're at least covering it, if not in detail, at least, weekly talking about it at some point. So I feel compelled. Honestly, I don't know if I wasn't peer pressured into it. I don't know that I'd keep watching it. It just feels to me, I'm waiting. I'm seriously hoping we get the Ned Stark / dragons hatching moment this season. That's going to keep me into the next one, because the palace intrigue is just, I'll be honest, it's just not doing it for me. That said, I thought this week's episode, from a performance standpoint, was probably the best episode of the season.
Yeah, no, I think that is an accurate assessment of the season. I've been on a journey this season where first episode I'm solid, but I was kind of more in your boat for the first 4 or 5 episodes. I like this, but it feels overly familiar. Like we're playing it safe. We're sticking to the palace intrigue formula that we know works because we'd seen it done. I mean, and even the basic premise is not too far off from season 1 of Game of Thrones. But then we had the time jump. I'm still resistant in many ways to embracing the 10-year time jump that we had between episode 5 and episode 6. I will say the last 2 episodes have made a really strong case for why it was a good move for the drama. So this episode was no exception. The performances were through the roof. I'm jumping ahead. But before I get to my thoughts on the episode, Chad, what have you thought about these time jumps?
I thought this time jump was handled so much better than the last one. The last 2 episodes of like the middling time jump just felt super weird to me. And like, I understand why we have to do it. I'm glad that theoretically we are done with them, at least from a, changing actors and performers out. Those last 2 episodes were just super strange, especially knowing that, these kids are going to be gone probably pretty soon. I didn't know exactly when, but knowing a little bit about what was to come. So yeah, this one much better. I'm glad we've settled on. Supposedly, I've seen the show creators basically say, barring some unforeseen circumstances, this is the cast that we are sticking with from now until whenever the show ends.
We've got so much to talk about, Chad. I'm glad that you're at least lukewarm on this season. How would you say, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most excited you've been for, 10 being, I don't know, I assume you were excited for Avengers Endgame in 2019, right?
Yes.
Okay. So 10's Avengers Endgame, and 1 is I can't be bothered to watch it. What level of enthusiasm would you say you have so far?
I went into the season as a 6. I'm probably like dialed back to a 5 right now. So
dial back.
It's in the middle. Like I said, I'll watch it. I let a couple of episodes come, so we actually binged 3 episodes this weekend just to catch up for this. Part of that was I just sometimes on Sunday nights I don't feel like getting into what they're giving me here. Some of it was just travel and things like that.
Well, I have to say, sir, your service is appreciated. The sacrifice of the 3 episodes binged, I get it. There's a lot of TV, so to watch 3 episodes back to back for a podcast is quite a bit of work. People assume it's all fun and games, but you have to carve a lot of time, and then you got to hope you like it. Yeah, so much. Yeah,
then I had to binge all the your podcasts, all the other podcasts that I've been saving in my to listen folder now because I didn't want to be spoiled. So there was a lot between yesterday afternoon and tonight that I had to in addition to catch up on. But happy to be here, excited to talk about it and see where you all have landed on the season and this latest episode.
Awesome. Well, again, we're super excited to have you here. Now, listeners, if you want to engage further with the Cast Beyond the Wall on social media channels, and I say social media, I really need to rewrite this to say traditional social media, meaning Twitter and Facebook. At this point, you could call them in quotes legacy social media platforms. We can be found on Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT, and we're also on Facebook at facebook.com/the Cast Beyond the Wall. But honestly, go follow us there. But honestly, the most important thing you can do to help us get discovered by more lords and ladies and maybe even dragons of the realm like yourself is to head on over to Spotify and Apple Podcast and give us a rating. Or if you're on Apple Podcast, you can even give us a written review. That would be super helpful. Let us know your thoughts. You can also send emails to castbeyondthewall@live.com. One other thing I wanted to note here before we jump into this week's episode is that we will not be spoiling any future events of House of the Dragon. So yes, I know that Fire and Blood is out there. We're really not going to be going into any of that. We're really just going to be talking about everything that's happened up until this episode. Maybe if it comes up and we feel like it's critical to the conversation, we may talk about the next time on. But honestly, we tend to avoid those as much as we can here. With all that said, let's go ahead and jump into this week's review of The Lord of the Tides.
As hand, I speak with the king's voice on this and all other matters.
Tomorrow, the Hightowers land their first blow. Those vipers rule in my father's name.
To King's Landing, then. The sea snake has taken a grave wound in battle in the Stepstones.
Who will take the Driftwood throne?
The crown cannot stand strong if the House of the Dragon remains divided.
This is a matter of blood, not ambition.
This is a trap.
Nephews? The threat of war looms.
According to IMDb, the official synopsis for The Lord of the Tides reads, 6 years later, the sides in the House of the Dragon have been shown, black against green, fighting for the inheritance of the throne. Small correction, IMDb. The episode said 10 years. It was actually a 6-year time jump. Just want to make that correction. Whoever writes these synopses. Daniel Stull, what did you think of the episode overall?
I came off pretty hot last week. I do feel like we're cooling off a little bit, but I also feel like this was a pretty big setup episode. I feel like we have really set up for the maybe traditional episode 9 Game of Thrones that we may be used to. I feel like we could really be in for a lot of chaos next week. So the pieces are all in place. I feel like the setting was really good. You know, like Chad said earlier, I think the performances were really great. I was a little worried about the time jump for this one. I think it landed, but last week I was so impressed with some of the child actors that I was wondering, like, are we losing something? But I don't think we did. I think that these new actors came right in and did a great job of carrying on some of that family tension that we experienced in the last episode. I would say really solid episode, and I'm really excited for next week's episode. I feel like it's going to be a huge one.
It could be a make or break, you could say.
Yes, definitely.
Because I really feel like up until this point, everything we have been watching has been leading up to the Dance of Dragons, which does not commence as long as Viserys is alive. But once he's gone, Daniel, like we've been talking about all season, I've kind of used the powder keg analogy to death. But like once he's gone, this thing's going to go boom. And jury's still out on how that's going to shape up in terms of television. But the buildup has been tremendous. I think this week was no exception, giving Viserys quite the send off there. But enough about my thoughts here. Chad, what did you think of this week's episode?
Yeah, I agree. It was nice to get everyone back together at the table, all in one room, you know, before whatever's about to go down goes down. You know, I've seen some of the memes, you know, right, point out that in Game of Thrones, the only time we actually see all of the Starks is like the opening of episode 1 of season 1, and like they are never all in the same room again after that. So this was nice to kind of come back again with the new actors for the kids. Everyone, you know, sit at a table, you know, have a meal together. Again, we can tell based on that how well that meal went, probably where things are going. But yeah, you know, this was a nice change of pace. I thought, you know, the tension was really ratcheted up. I thought the performances by everyone, you know, again, this morning we're seeing a lot of, Paddy Considine for, you know, Emmy Awards, you know, really best performance by him from the season. So like I said, you know, I liked it for all of those reasons. Still not enough dragons for a show with the word dragons in the title, but I got a feeling we're going to get to those soon enough.
Yeah, well said. I agree on all counts. Yes, Paddy Considine getting the Emmy buzz already. We'll see. But I will say he has been tremendous this season, and I thought this episode in particular gave him a great platform just to have some of those just powerhouse scenes where he owned the room, moved me to tears almost at least once, maybe if not twice, and he had some great material to work with. But also, I mean, I'd be remiss if we didn't mention Emma Darcy, just absolutely blowing me away as Princess Rhaenyra. We also have Olivia Cook as Queen Alicent Hightower. Again, I would say a low-key MVP. Olivia Cook is just killing it in this role. But really all around it was good stuff. I love the sequence in which we're in the throne room and we're actually having to hear these different cases for who should take Driftmark and be the Lord of Driftmark. You know it's not going to go well, but it's that classic, the classic Game of Thrones tension you were talking about, Chad, there for a moment, how it's ratcheted up where you're like, okay, this scene's not going to end well. How is it going to go poorly is the big question. How it went poorly I was pretty satisfied. Again, not enough dragons. However, seeing Matt Smith decapitate a dude out of nowhere with a quippy one-liner, I can't complain. It was a lot of fun to watch. What can I say? The death scene at the end of the episode of King Viserys, I just thought was extremely well done. despite everything else, he still dies alone, still muttering on about the prophecies, and it's very heartbreaking, but again, powerful performance from Paddy Considine. I like this episode quite a bit. It definitely feels like the deep breath before the plunge sort of thing. So I think episode 9 is really going to be where we get quite a bit of the fireworks, so to speak. Let's dive into this week's episode, The Lord of the Tides. I want to start here just by talking about sort of the inciting issue of this episode. There tends to be throughout the show, I've noticed there's like a core challenge or issue or something going on that tends to drive the conflict. And this week it is a challenge to the Velaryon succession is issued because even though we don't see it on screen, Corlys, the sea snake, has been severely injured. It is expected that he is going to die. And even though there is a succession plan in place, it is challenged and questioned by his brother, Vaemond Velaryon. And this goes back to, he challenged this based on the fact that Rhaenyra's children are not Laenor's children. They are bastards, which again, everyone seems to kind of know, but no one wants to actually acknowledge it because they know that the king's not on board with it. I have to sympathize a little bit with Vaemond. I know he's not our POV. I know he's not the protagonist, but this guy basically says our family legacy is on the line here. Does he have some grounds to stand on? Daniel, I'll start with you.
100%. I think everything he's saying makes total sense to me. There is one thing, like, I feel like a lot of people have said, like, oh, we're on the verge of war, which I think is, but we've also gone through 16, 17, 18 years now or whatever. So we've been on the verge of war for a long time. And that's one of his excuses is we're on the verge of war. Who wants a child on the throne when we're on the verge of war? But I also think that they actually are on the verge of war now. But so I think everything he's saying is like logical and makes sense, but there's that thing that we've been talking about all season where Viserys essentially refuses to handle conflict. And so because of that, nobody is willing to address the fact that, Rhaenyra's children are not Laenor's children. And we can get into this more later, but like Viserys definitely loves Rhaenyra. I mean, and so it seems like that's the one thing that he's been willing to sort of make a stand on. So I think everything he's saying makes sense, but also it's not going to amount to much because of Viserys and the way that he handles these kind of things.
I guess my question is more of an ethical, a principle question. Does this guy have ethical, moral, at least some ground to stand on to say, yo, I'm going to call BS on this because I want actual Velaryons to carry the legacy forward? I mean, whether or not it amounts to anything, we'll get to. But I mean, do you think that this guy is at least somewhat righteously motivated?
His motivations, I think, are selfish, but I think that they're, but you said ethical, like I think that he has a point, but I also think his motivation's mixed up in maybe there is some righteousness there, but he also like wants power just like everyone else. I think it's complicated, but yeah, I do think that there is definitely some ethical standpoint that he has, he could stand on.
I wanted to set that precedent so that when we talk about this later, it's a little more clear where we stand on it. But Chad, what do you think? Do you think Vaemond has grounds to stand on, or is this whole thing just he needs to kind of sit down and just take the status quo as it comes?
I mean, based on like whatever we know about the politics of Westeros, like it seems that he does. And it's right. It's the same reason that like we all thought Joffrey shouldn't have, gotten the Iron Throne because we knew he wasn't Robert's son. And the same thing of like, you couldn't actually say that out loud without risking getting your tongue or your head cut off or, and some other type of repercussion around that. I thought the argument of like, hey, we're about to have another battle in the Stepstones. Do we really want a child commanding? Like that to me seems more of the right argument to make than the bloodline, because, as in last week, Corlys pointed out, right, like the history books don't remember bloodlines, right? They remember kind of, the names only, right? And this is a world where there are no, photographs or things like that. So, in another 100 years, as long as they have a Velaryon last name, that's kind of all that matters. But, given all of the other precedent we've seen, and some of the precedent that comes out of this, I think will have a big effect on Rhaenyra's, claim to the throne going forward. But based off of what we've seen here, like Vaemond at least has a has an argument to be made if this was actually a crown that was truly righteous and fair. I think we would have had a much more interesting discussion than what we thought the outcome was going to be until the big shakeup that happens during the scene.
Chad, you mentioned two different things there I found really interesting. One, kudos to you for drawing the parallel between Rhaenyra's children and Joffrey Baratheon, because the reason I like that is because I think the show House of the Dragon, despite it embracing a lot of the morally gray areas, I think generally speaking, they set up Rhaenyra Targaryen as your protagonist and Alicent Hightower and the Hightowers your antagonists, right?
They're working hard to get you to like Rhaenyra more than Alicent, I'll say, for the time being.
Right. And maybe that'll change in future seasons. I could be totally off, but my take has been that the way that scenes are written and the perspectives we're seeing is generally designed to make us more empathetic with Rhaenyra and her family and her bloodline versus Alicent. Though I do think they've done a good job at fostering that sort of empathy for both sides. I don't want to it's not like a black and white thing. That said, I think, because we are generally as an audience more on board or at least empathetic with Rhaenyra, we think, hey, it's not a big, what's the big deal that they're bastards? It's all about the names and the titles. But see, in Game of Thrones, the shoe was on the other foot, where you're like, well, no, screw that guy. Joffrey Baratheon's not the right king. He's not a real heir. I mean, it was a big deal. Audience viewers were up in arms about, he doesn't deserve to be on the throne. He's a bastard and everyone knows it. Versus, I feel like in this show, the way they're positioning it, we're supposed to be a little bit more on team Rhaenyra's family, for maintaining that line of power. So I don't know if there's anything super interesting to be said about that yet, because the show hasn't landed on whether or not her kids would make a good ruler of the Driftmark. But I do think it's interesting to kind of compare and contrast, because even though this is similar to Game of Thrones season 1, there's a little bit of a remix going on there.
For sure.
The second thing you noted that I hadn't even considered was the way that Vaemond unwittingly directly goes against what his brother Corlys laid out to his wife Rhaenys in the last episode, which is it's not about bloodline. It doesn't matter. It's all about titles. It's about names. That's what people are going to remember. I hadn't even occurred to me until you mentioned it. So I think it's a great point of seeing, hey, this is what these characters' POVs are being laid out, and certain supporting characters, when they butt up against them, tend to not end up in the best positions.
Yeah, and I think both Corlys and Otto are making a lot of moves based off of that, right? Based off of it's not about what people see today. It's about how the history books will remember us 100 years from now, right? And I think we even get a little bit of that, in the, I guess it was last week's episode, where they're talking about, Aegon the Conqueror and Pentos. And again, I'm not deep in the books, but the history he is telling is the history of the winner, not probably how it actually played out. And so I think it sets up a lot of this of we want to tell the tale of for the history books. I could actually care less about what people say today. Which
even that sort of perspective adds a lot of value to how we think about the show House of the Dragon, because I've only read about 150 pages of Fire and Blood. That's right, listeners. I've made zero progress since episode 2 of this podcast. Forgive me. There's a lot of TV and podcasts. That book is written as more of a historical recounting of things that happen, not this. You don't see all these interactions between characters. You just sort of read this guy doing his best to retell history as it's been passed down or as he's researched it, right? And even his perspective is very limited and sexist in a very George R.R. Martin sort of way, and an infallible recounting of history based on who won and what people said about the winners. So I don't know, just I think it really adds a lot of synergy between what the book is trying to accomplish as well. Real quick, not really a lot to talk about here. Just want to acknowledge it that as we see that Daemon does hear word of this challenge from Vaemond right after he receives 3 eggs from Syraxis, which is Rhaenyra's dragon. I think that's a little bit of a seed planting for future, probably not even this season. I'd imagine future seasons of House of the Dragon. I liked that they had a nice little music cue, the Daenerys theme you could hear playing as he was pulling the eggs out of the, sap or Tar, or whatever you want to call him. And then we also cut to a scene of Rhaenyra hearing about this challenge as she's trying to teach the old elder of the strong children, Velaryon. Anything at all you guys want to discuss? I didn't really have a lot to talk about with this little interaction between Rhaenyra and Daemon. As it seemed to be more like, you know what happened over the last 6 years? Let's just talk about it really fast so the audience knows what's going on. That was sort of my take on those two scenes. But I just wanted to make sure before we move on, anything in particular you guys wanted to note about the scene we got on Dragonstone this week? Chad?
Not really. I mean, it's interesting to see a little bit more again about dragons and the I don't know, the husbandry of that. I mean, we still don't really know, do those eggs, they go, oh, only half the eggs hatch. Like, do they need to be fertilized? How does Daemon even know that it's like in this giant crevice on, is that a traditional dragon? That's the type of stuff that I feel like if we didn't have the time jumps, maybe there'd be a little bit more time for. That said, I don't know if any of that is in the books either, and it's just one of these things that they can easily gloss over and magically wave their hand of like, well, dragons have eggs, and we're always keeping the lookout. Why Daemon is the one that has to go spelunking for it, I'm not sure, but at least interesting to see. I'm assuming, because we, again, not to jump too far, but I think we're about to see a lot more dragons die than be born. So, yes. Maybe again, this is just another one of those kind of breaths towards the future.
Absolutely. I won't repeat too much of what was said in our last week's podcast, but Daniel, Daniel probably recalls, we talked with Brock and our guest Brock and Lacey last week about how the rules about there's a lot of these rules that are very unclear. Like, they haven't really laid out how dragons work at all. They keep giving us little like tidbits of information, almost as if it's not a big deal. But you're like, no, I really need to understand, how many dragons do we actually have? How do those get assigned to the children? How do they prioritize that? How long does it take for them to hatch? Because, we're about to go into a war where dragons are fighting each other. So it would be I would argue it would be beneficial for the audience to understand how those things work before, we get to the war part and people are trying to grow more dragons, I would assume. Daniel, any other thoughts on this scene at Dragonstone?
No, I think that's great. I think that is probably one of the things that we've touched on before that is kind of missing, is we would like to see, like, it's House of the Dragon. We would like to see more about like how the dragons, like, why do only the Targaryens have them? Wow, how does their relationship work? Stuff like that. Because we don't get that, really in Game of Thrones. Dragons were gone. Daenerys is just sort of special in that regard. But so yeah, it was perhaps just in the future, hey, 3 dragons are coming up. Those 3 dragons will have an influence on this upcoming war. I don't know. Again, don't know how fast they grow, all that. But that was sort of, nice to see that, and maybe something to keep in the back of your head, like that they have these 3 new dragons.
From there, we have Rhaenyra and Daemon decide that their best move is to head to Dragonstone, because they know that in order for Vaemond to win this sort of challenge of the succession, they would have to get the king's buy-in or blessing. And they know that their assumption, like the rest of us, is that Viserys is unable to make any sort of decisions, i.e. that means the Hightowers are going to be the ones calling the shots. So they need to make sure their voice is in the room, and maybe, just maybe, they can somehow persuade Viserys or hope he's in good enough shape to weigh in on their favor. So they do arrive at King's Landing in the Red Keep, and they receive absolutely no welcome. Like, one dude comes out and greets them. He's like, hey, what's up, guys? And Rhaenyra's like, hey, it's been a long time. I guess we'll carry our own luggage up to the 15th floor, And as Chad noted earlier, as they're sort of walking up, it's a radically different place. There's been a huge embrace of the religion, the Lord, what is it, the Lord of the Seven, the 7-starred God. I'm going to butcher that, but they have embraced this religion. Again, listeners who watch Game of Thrones are going to remember it is a prominent religion in Westeros, even at that point in time. Rhaenyra and Daemon, after they dropped their bags off, decided to go visit Viserys, who appears to be on his deathbed. This is the first time we've seen him in 6 years, even though he looked like he was on his deathbed last time we saw him. and they do attempt to ask him for his help, and he is very unclear on exactly what is happening. As we see, it's because he's quite drugged up on the milk of the poppy. So, Chad, I want to start with you and turn it to you here. I mean, an ongoing discussion that we've been having all season is whether or not the large time jumps between these episodes has been justified. And I want to separate this from what we talked about earlier, because we've talked about the effects and sort of the shortcomings. But what I want to focus on here is how those small moments or those individual character arcs we got in those episodes, have these contributed to the interactions that we're seeing, right? So we're going to see an adult Rhaenyra plead for her father's help. Daemon, who we know has a contentious relationship with Viserys, trying to ask for his help, which we know is a big ask. Have those moments from the first 5 episodes per se, do you think they have helped us justify this larger picture, especially as it relates to their relationship to Viserys?
I think that they do. I just wish we had more time for them and more of them. That said, I know I've read and heard some discussion, right, of like, what if these first 8 episodes were actually the first entire 2 seasons, and we got a whole season of 8 or 10 episodes with the first round of kids and another 8 or 10 with the second round of kids. I think we'd be having the opposite conversation of like, this is not moving fast enough. We all know the war is coming. Can we get there? I think it speaks more to like, did we need the setup of young Alicent and young Rhaenyra, to explain, having watched to where we are now, it almost feels like I would have rather have started with the middle set of kids and I don't know, flashbacks or something, or some exposition. I wish we had found a way to have a little bit more balance, to have these really nice moments between people, without having to skip a bunch of time, because, again, it just leads to more questions of, has Rhaenyra tried to send a raven to her father and they've gone unanswered? What else has been going? I don't know. There's something else there that I can't imagine her just going 6 years completely disconnected from any kind of conversation or interaction with her father. And I don't know that. And if that's true that they haven't, I don't know that even if this moment that we see makes up for that.
That's a fair point. So if I'm hearing you, you're saying it's not that the moments don't matter. It's that, did we really take the most impactful and also economical approach to getting there? And I say economical meaning related to storytelling way to get there, if I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, we have to set up this animosity in order for the payoff, right? Like, I mean, we need, I'll say, most of the background information to understand why this dinner that we're going to talk about is so uncomfortable. I don't know if we got there in the way that whether me or seemingly a lot of people appreciated or responded to well. And I feel like a lot of people, like we talked about earlier, are just at the awesome, we're here now, let's charge on forward. Let's get going. And so, I like these smaller interactions. I think there's going to be room for more of them. I wish we had gotten to it in a different way. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Daniel, what was your thoughts here on? And I'm bringing this up as it relates to this moment on their deathbed, because it seems like a very tender moment where a daughter and her husband / also her dad's brother, who has a contentious relationship, they have this like really small exchange where they're trying so hard to communicate with him. And for me, I would just say I was a lot more emotional than I was expecting it to be, but it was only that way because of all the setup we had done in especially the first 5 episodes, but even the last 2 to a lesser degree. I mean, Daniel, what was your thoughts on this interaction and how the smaller investment that we made earlier in the season, did we need that for this to really make an impact?
Yeah, I think, Chad made a great point about how if people have been saying like, spreading this out to 2 seasons, would we be saying this is way too slow, kind of thing. So I think that is a point to consider. And for me, I think it really does work. I think from one of the most interesting relationships. As sad, I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but as sad as it is, I feel like Rhaenyra and Alicent is a really sad story, their relationship. We saw them having some really close, tender moments at the beginning of the season. And then, I think it was Lainey that brought it up a couple episodes ago. The patriarchy has forced these two women to, instead of be bonding together, separated and be enemies. And that's just a really sad story. I wish it could be different. I would love to see a story where they get to work together. And we do, get a little bit of like a moment where they're able to put aside some differences, but we all know that that's not going to last very long. So for me, I think it is working. I really like the smaller moments, and I think that we're going to get, more of that now that seemingly the time jumps are coming to a close. Could we have had a little more of them? Yeah, probably. But if we put more of them in there, I don't know how much it would really, really add to the story. So for me, I think it's worked so far.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you mentioned Alicent and Rhaenyra, and I want to talk about how their relationship has evolved in this specific episode. The two of them have a very tragic positions they find themselves in this episode, I think, actually does a great job underlying that. Now, Alicent does eventually visit Rhaenyra and Daemon while they're visiting with Viserys, and they claim that he must be kept on the milk of the poppy to curb his suffering, because at that point in time, Viserys doesn't seem to even know where or when he's at, when he's at. He vaguely recognizes Daemon for a second. He kind of recognizes Rhaenyra maybe, and then he sort of drifts away. But let's hone in on this, because I have to say, I know Alicent's trying to be queenly, but this new interaction was quite a bit cooler than I was expecting it to be. I was expecting them not to necessarily try to murder each other, but I was expecting a more passive aggressive jabs between the two of them when they saw face to face again. What did you guys think about how these dynamics between Rhaenyra and Alicent are different on this meeting, given how heated it was in the last episode? Chad?
I mean, here I think it's very clear that at least in the last 6 years, if not the last 16, right, Rhaenyra has learned to play the game, right? So Rhaenyra knows that she's entering the bed of vipers. She knows that Alicent and her father probably have, they probably knew that they had power going in. I think seeing the signs of the Seven in the castle kind of, seal the deal on just how much power that they have, seeing her father the way that it is, seeing the fact that, right, the cobwebs and the dust haven't even been cleared from his giant model of Valyria, right? It's, they know what the power is. So I think it makes sense that Rhaenyra now has to be like placating her, right? If they actually have any hope of potentially winning this petition, they know that they have to, at least pretend to subjugate themselves to Alicent. I think the interesting thing here, right, is that Alicent still has not, in my opinion, learned to play the game well, because she to your point, she probably should have been more aggressive towards them for, how come you haven't come to see your father or your brother, right? There's a lot of things that she actually could have done to throw the upper hand a little bit more. And again, I think we see this when we get to the dinner as well. That to me, it just shows, Rhaenyra is probably being tutored by her now, uncle husband of how to play the game. And Alicent continues to likely just be the pawn of her father without a lot of kind of, self-sufficient thinking on her end.
Right. And I think it sort of speaks to the thing about Alicent, and it really stuck out. They hit on it really well last episode when she sort of breaks out in anger and you hear her going on against Rhaenyra. She's like, I played my role the way I was supposed to. There's a lot of resentment there. And I like how you underline it, that she's still sort of in the same place, because for her, she's just playing a role. She has a certain demeanor and certain expectations she's trying to play through. I think she's trying to be politically minded, but to your point, I think she really is more of just a pawn to whatever Otto is telling her to do. At least at this point in time. Daniel, did you have any thoughts on the dynamics between Rhaenyra and Alicent in this first meeting?
Yeah, for me, what stood out was Alicent's restraint. Obviously coming off of last episode, we saw her sort of have that explosion. And so I think her restraint was a little surprising. Not so much Rhaenyra's, but she was I think she was a little, maybe her last line, if I remember correctly, was a little snarky, but that was about it. And I do wonder, she seemed to feel, she had that sort of explosion last week. And I wonder if, she seemed to have a little bit of guilt towards the end of last week's episode. I wonder if she sort of was trying to be get back, okay, restrain yourself, don't let yourself explode, trying to have a little more reserved thing and just kind of overdid it or whatever. I also do think that they're both aware. I think Alicent is very aware of the relationship that Viserys and Rhaenyra has. And I do think she is, despite how much she dislikes Rhaenyra, does have a little bit of empathy for them. We think all the way back to the beginning episode, she wanted them to have a good relationship. She tried to get Viserys to talk to Rhaenyra and stuff like that. So I think that there is also despite everything, she does care about, them and some level. So I think that's also part of the her restraint there in that scene.
Yeah, it's again sort of a one not a total 180, but just a real step in a different direction from last week, and I think it sets the scene for the dinner scene we'll get here in a little bit. But I want to shift gears here to talk a little bit about we see there's still some bad blood here between uncles and their nephews, and I'm speaking specifically about Prince Jacaerys and Lucerys. They encounter Vaemond, who, gosh, guys, Vaemond looks like an anime character. Can I just throw it out there? Eye patch, long silver hair. He's either an anime character or a Death Eater from Harry Potter. Those are the two options I could come up with. And he just doesn't. He doesn't say anything. He's got a long, pointy nose, and everything he says is just meant to to get a rise out of someone. Are you here to train? But hey, I wanted to call this out because these characters have also evolved quite a bit. Again, Vaemond being the one who was picked on. Well, now he's the battle-hardened kid who can beat Sir Criston in the courtyard. Meanwhile, his brother Aegon apparently doesn't get out of bed until noon after a assault, trigger warning, sexually assaulting, one of his maids. And he's still being reprimanded by his mom, and he's supposed to be the older brother. So I just really wanted to quickly, and again, this is going to factor, I think, into this dinner scene we'll get to later. Daniel, did you have any thoughts on exactly how the I would say next generation, they're not technically the same generation, they're not cousins, the uncles and the nephews of the next generation have evolved since we last saw them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can just tell by the way that they even look each other as they're at each other through the courtyard. They don't even have to really say anything. You just sort of see that's the guy, that's the kid that, took my eye. And he's you just see the immediate sort of tension that exists just in the way they're looking at each other. And so, I mean, even when we get to that, I don't want to get too far ahead, but when we get to that scene later, they are not able to keep it. I mean, they're also, younger, but they're also just not able to keep it together like Rhaenyra and Alicent are. So I think that, when we're looking forward to this potential war, I think it'll be very easy for them to, they have a lot of beef, I guess. It's going to be really easy for them to take that. It doesn't take much for them to get to the spot where they're ready to, at each other's throats.
Yeah, it's like a beef, but without any of the history that their parents have, where they actually at some point liked each other. I mean, it's kind of implied they might have gotten along well enough at one point, but I mean, have pretty much because of the feud between them and their parents, have hated each other ever since. But Chad, I mean, what did you think about this evolution? Anything notable you want to call out here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. I think, look, in the last episode, we saw Vaemond actually holds his own against his 4 cousins down in that tunnel. If it wasn't for Jacaerys throwing the sand in his face, right? He probably comes out of that battle, battle in quotes, a winner. So it only makes sense that we jump ahead 6 years, and look, he's got something to prove, right? He's a second son of someone that for all intents and purposes isn't supposed to inherit the throne. It makes sense that he's got to figure out what his life is going to be like. He's not wed already, so he's actually got to put in the work, right? He needs again, I wish we got the Vaemond, training montage. I saw, I wish we got the Rocky music, right? Of he claims Vhagar, he gets back, and like he just sets his mind to becoming like the best swordsman, in the keep, which is what it seems like he did. And so, I think that makes sense. I think, he's the one. And I think there's a lot of parallels, right, to Daemon in the same way, right? Another second son, always having to prove himself. His older brother is the one that like everyone looks towards. So, I got to imagine we're heading towards at some point, the clash between those two. Dude's got the oldest, biggest dragon out there as well. So he's I think this does a really good job of setting Aemon up as, a force to be reckoned with at some point. And again, he's the only one that doesn't kind of placate Viserys, right? He actually has the sharp-witted tongue at dinner.
Yes. One thing I want to note there too, about him becoming the greatest swordsman, when Sir Kristen compliments him, he says, you're going to go win a tournament. You can win any tournament you want. And he's like, I'm not interested in a tournament. He's like, so clearly he is very set on the fact that he knows there's going to be a war and that he wants to be like the MVP of the war, wars to come. And he seems pretty confident in that, so much so that again as we get to the dinner, doesn't mind stirring the pot a little bit to sort of instigate that. We also have Rhaenyra. She attempts to forge an alliance with Rhaenys to no avail, and apparently I just wanted to note this because I don't know if we haven't discussed it in many years on this podcast. I guess as a sort of a symbol of peace between Rhaenyra and Rhaenys, they offered one of Daemon's daughters to be a ward under Rhaenys, which is how they sort of maintain this relationship. They didn't really talk, but that was their way of saying, no, we didn't kill your son, or no, if we have offended you, please accept this gift, so to speak. I just want to know, they kind of glossed over it pretty quickly, but just want to remind you all of what a ward is. A ward is a member of a noble house who has been taken in by another noble family to be raised for a time. Practice varies, with it sometimes being undertaken voluntarily. This seems to be a voluntary movement. The other major ward that to speak of from Game of Thrones would be Theon Greyjoy was a ward of the Starks, was the really big one. They mentioned it a few times throughout Game of Thrones. That's the really big one. So for those of you listeners who were like, wait, what's going on there? That's what was going on. It was a ward, and if you haven't been familiarized in a few years, the way they kind of just gloss over it would be very easy to be confused.
Get your waggly hot dog memes out for Theon.
Or Reek. We're going to talk about Rhaenys here in a moment, but I want to circle back to Rhaenyra and Viserys because there's another scene where Rhaenyra pleads with him during a thunderstorm the night before they have to go argue their case for why they should stick with the succession plan. And Viserys is, rambling on about the prophecy that he shared with Rhaenyra in the first episode. And I found this particular scene to be interesting because Rhaenyra appears to resent him for naming her the heir, and she even implies that she doesn't even really want the Iron Throne anymore at this point, which again I think is just a huge contrast to the Rhaenyra we saw in the first 5 episodes. Now, the next morning, Viserys, consciously or subconsciously, Viserys felt moved. I assume by Rhaenyra's words, he was at least aware that she was there, that he asked Otto to arrange dinner with his family after the day's proceedings, and he also refuses the milk of the poppy. So I think, Chad, you'd implied earlier, you're like, oh, about a third of the way through the episode, you're like, oh, this guy's not going to make it through this episode. For me, this is when I was like, yep, this is the last episode, the Last Supper sort of thing. Daniel, at what point did you think, okay, Viserys is not going to make it through this episode? That's part one. Part two is, do you yourself think that Viserys knows that he is probably on his last day or one of his last remaining days?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just like you said, as soon as he refuses the milk of the poppy, that was me taking it, all right, he's going to die and he knows he's going to die. And so whatever, he's got to do for the day, like he's going to do what he needs to do and then die. Like that's kind of how I took it. So that's what I knew. And I think he knew for sure. And I think that's why he does what he does is like this was his last motion for Rhaenyra. He's been very consistent on that he wants her to be the heir. He clearly loves her very much, and so that was sort of his last hurrah.
We were all kind of on the same page, it sounds like. Chad, I want to get your take there. Do you think, like Viserys, do you think he was fully embracing, oh yeah, this is it, I'm gonna do it, or do you think it was just he wanted to be more alert for the day?
Nah, I mean, I think he knows. I think, right, we've also gotten, I mean, he's someone who believes in prophecy. I think, again, we can get to the end of the episode, but it becomes clear in both, that thunderstorm scene and then maybe the final scene that maybe he is actually seeing or hearing things that aren't there. I interpret it as, he had some vision, some visitor in the night, that he's aware on some level that this is his last chance to interact with his entire family.
And he knows how contentious the family is. He probably he's downplayed it over the years, but I mean, he even acknowledges at the dinner that this is his last chance to sort of his last Hail Mary to try to get everyone to make good, before he's no longer with them.
Yeah, again, if he's gone 6 years without seeing his daughter, without seeing his brother, and he spent most of that time in his bed or in the being carried around in the chair that the King's Guard carries around him, there's an awful lot of time, right, to imagine and play out how things could have been, should be, what's happened to his family. So I think we're seeing someone here, right, and this is where the performance is outstanding, right? Like that's probably spent the last few years like having to come to terms with a lot of regret, and he knows this might be his. I think he absolutely believes this is his last shot to mend those family ties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Well, I want to move on to what could be argued to be the climactic scene of the episode, or at least one of the two climactic scenes of the episode, which is Driftmark's next ruler is decided. Vaemond Velaryon makes the case that he should be named ruler of Driftmark based on his true Velaryon blood, and he makes his case. There's some sniping between him and Rhaenyra, and Alicent steps in to try to be the moderator. The second that Rhaenyra starts to make her case, I don't know, I thought it was great how you see the doors open for a second before she stops. I just thought it was a great interaction where you're like, wait, the doors are opening. What does that mean? What's going down? And then you just see hunchbacked Viserys at the very end with his cane, just slowly making his way down the hall. Also, really, again, nice little music cue here. You can hear shades of the song "The King's Road," which is frequently associated with King Robert in season 1 of Game of Thrones as he's making his way up there. Really nice touch there. So let's talk about the politics of the scene. Let's unpack this. Viserys, his attendance does in fact shift the proceedings, and I really want to get into the weeds of why. So Chad, how did just the sheer presence of Viserys being in the room really shake up what was expected to be an easy win for Vaemond and the Hightowers?
Yeah. So first, have you seen? Has anyone set the opening of those doors to the Stone Cold music? Because that's what I picture. Right? Is oh my God! He's here he is. I mean, he totally upends this, right? And I think it's just one of these things where Otto has outwitted himself, right? It's he's got what he believes to be this perfect plan. He's taken advantage of the king being as sick for as long as he is. And Viserys is actually right again, the not wanting to upset the apple cart. He has a much stricter interpretation of Westeros law, which is which is what does his wife say about this? What do we know? What his actual wishes were? That's all that should matter. As if he cannot talk for himself, we should hear the closest person, right? And that closest person is not his brother, who has obviously his own machination. So I think again to his death, Viserys tries to play this as even and down the middle and by the book as he can. I think that ultimately, is a big part of his downfall is him not being able to recognize those moves. But he does this as he lived and made all of his other decisions, and it absolutely makes sense. I think we will, we can save it for some predictions, but I think this kind of, what does his wife believe his wishes were as a precedent will have some impact in the future based on how the episode ended. But for sure, I thought it played it out really well. And then the other shift there is Rhaenys recognizing that change in power, recognizing what's about to come, right, and making that game time decision to throw her lot in, with Rhaenyra, and I think that there's probably a lot of reasons of why that is the case, but I think it absolutely, again, shows the fact that, I know you mentioned before, Lainey talked about it, if they had just let the women figure their own shit out, they Westeros would be in a much better position by the time we get to Game of Thrones. If only Rhaenys was actually made queen, if only Alicent was left to be a child for longer, right? If only they were to accept Rhaenyra as the next queen, there a lot of things would be different, and I do wonder even, would they be keeping Viserys alive as long as they have? Would Otto be working this hard to keep Viserys alive if they had just accepted Rhaenyra as the next queen?
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's interesting because I do think there is a nugget of truth in a lot of Otto's motives, i.e., I do think he is trying very hard to prevent a war. I think he's always tried to prevent that. Caveat being, because he knows the second they go to war, he's almost certainly going to lose his position. So I want to make it very clear that he's very self-motivated, but I do think if you look at his actions about why didn't, because I think Daniel and I had talked about this on a couple of previous episodes, other guests, why didn't they just poison Viserys? That would have done him in years ago. But I think the goal was for him and his family to accumulate as much power as they could before they had to go to war. At least that's my take. And, this is one of those times when, thank God Viserys had the gut feeling to not trust Otto. He said, and I also kind of wonder, after he removed Otto's hand the first time, did he ever really trust him after that? And I think that's why he recognized that he needed to come in and weigh in favor of Rhaenyra. Now, again, to your point, Chad, he plays it down the middle by saying the succession plan was already decided. What's the issue?
Again, it's another, I don't have to make a decision. The decision was already made.
Yeah.
And again, this lack of, I mean, that ultimately is, Viserys's, major character flaw is his inability to make decisions, to act. Before he dies, his last motion is, no, whatever was before is what it should be. I don't actually need to make a decision. My decision is whatever was announced stands.
I just want to remind you guys, we made this decision a long time ago. So let's just put it to bed again. Daniel, what was your take on Viserys and how exactly did his attendance in this proceeding really shift the politics of the situation?
Yeah, I think that it seems like basically Otto and Alicent have basically been ruling the kingdom and on behalf of Viserys. It doesn't seem like he's been around. There's been, like we mentioned, the Light of the Seven. Everything's been sort of changing. For him to make a physical appearance at this point, we don't know exactly how many years this has been, but if it's been like this for all 6 years, but he hasn't even been making appearances now. For him to walk in there, in pain on the cane, is a big deal. Like for him to show up when he hasn't been able to show up in the last several years. So that definitely is something that people, consider. And the last time that he did speak on something, about the heritage or whatever, he said he was going to take people's tongues, right? So people, I think, are definitely, respecting that. But again, as Chad said, Viserys did it in the most non-confrontational way he possibly could. I do like, though, that he does sort of give the floor to Rhaenys, and is that's the person who would know what the plan is, like let her lay out the plan and then we'll just go with that plan. And, we had that little scene before where Rhaenyra and Rhaenys had talked and Rhaenys had sort of said she was going to like vote for herself. But, in the last moments, she decides to, go with Rhaenyra. So that's an interesting decision by her. But yeah, I think it's just that the fact that he has been so, sick and bedridden and still like forces himself to walk up those stairs. Like it's a really long, like arduous process to watch, right? Like you feel really bad for him. So I think that is just the visual of that in itself. Like people had to give him the space to be able to do what he needed to do.
And then going back to one of the previous questions, the Daemon picking up the crown and giving it to him, right? Like we get that, and then at dinner, we get Rhaenyra's speech. Like those are going back, like those are the little moments that I wish we had more of, right? Because like that says more about Daemon's actual character than like, and then, conflate that with what happens like 2 minutes later. But like that says more about who Daemon is than like any blustering and talking and like silver tongue that we get out of him.
That's a great point because, going back to the beginning of the season, he was like, supposed to be the heir and like really seemed to have a lot of didn't respect Viserys at all. But in that moment, he does love him. And in that moment, he is able to like be supportive of him, which, for the longest time, he was not supportive of him. So that shows like how much he is like over the years, like how his character has grown and changed in some ways too.
Yeah. And and again, I'm sure there's a lot of like, I told you so about Otto, right? Like I told you him back in episode 1, like, and he doesn't bring it up here. He doesn't, use it to kind of throw it in his face. It's like a great tender moment of like him, helping out his older brother here. And I just think that shows like, again, they're working overtime to get, Rhaenyra and through her Daemon to be much more sympathetic characters than like maybe they actually are deserving of, but they've done it well.
Well, and I think it just goes to show that at least in these final moments, Daemon, flawed as he may be, and he's made a lot of, we've called him the disruptor. Lainey actually mentioned that a couple episodes ago, but I think it really sums it up well. He does stir pot. He does stir the shit. He's there to create chaos. So it's not as if it's unwarranted or, but at the end of the day, it seems that his love for his brother in these final moments is more important to him than any claim that he thought he was shorted, which is just really powerful. And again, Matt Smith is so good. I mean, I know he gets lots of quippy one-liners and they're great. But honestly, the best acting I think he does is when it's just like looks on his face. He just makes these looks or takes these very subtle actions that it just really moves you to kind of show what this character's about. So yeah, Daniel, we saw that Rhaenys she sort of decided to hedge her bets in the wars to come, so to speak. Elaborate that for me, Dan. What was your take on how did she use this one moment that kind of was unexpected? How did she use it to her advantage?
Yeah, I mean, we heard I think the biggest thing that she does is states the marrying of the children in public. That was like a private conversation that her and Rhaenyra had. And she basically, that's her in that moment saying, okay, I'll back you, Rhaenyra, but you're gonna have to follow through on what we talked about. And she makes that statement public. So now there's no going back on that, even though they didn't necessarily agree to it in private. So yeah, I think that was the biggest thing that she did. I'm and I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure why she did it. Because she had talked about, taking it for herself. We've seen a lot from her this season about how she seems to be, even more than Corlys, accepted the fact that she wasn't able to be queen and it was given to Viserys instead. So it was interesting that she didn't take that moment. And yeah, like I said, I'm not 100% sure why she didn't do that. So I'd be interested to hear if you guys feel like you have a reason, because that one was a little more puzzling for me. I'm just thinking about her character. She has lost a lot of people. She's lost basically everyone in her life that she loved. So maybe this is her trying to sort of like find someone that she can grab onto and then have that sort of last, remaining family left. But I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like that I think is the romantic view of it parallels Viserys. It's like, let me pull my family in closer, right? Like, how can we make us tighter? I think the cynical view is going back to last week, the blood versus legacy conversation that her and Corlys have, right? This guarantees that actual Velaryon blood will continue, kind of down through not only Driftmark, but the Velaryon household, being that her granddaughters, right, are actual Targaryen Velaryon blood. You've got the strong boys with they're half Targaryen, right? So we've got theoretically their offspring then would be 3/4 not House Velaryon, but Velaryon blood in them. And so, I think that could be another reason where she recognizes an opportunity of kind of being able to shore up and guarantee that the House of Velaryon will continue to have kind of, I'll say strong Velaryon blood in it.
Yes, the strength of the Velaryon blood will continue. Yeah, I think just to put a pin in it, I think, Daniel, you raised a good question about the why. I think, Chad, I'm pretty aligned with you. I wouldn't say it's cynical. I call it more pragmatic. But yeah, it could be. It is definitely more politically motivated. But I think it's still even then it is a romantic view of pragmatism, which is, listen, I think it's because she tends to like Rhaenyra and want to support her. But when she thought she was just up against the Hightowers, she says, "No, I'm better off arguing in my own defense with the courts than backing you," because she knows that if she backs her, she's backing the strong kids. And that's a losing battle that she knows she will lose. However, with Viserys here calling the shots, and she knows how he feels about this, she thinks, I actually think I could sway the decision to both benefit Rhaenyra and also honor Corlys and my wishes as well, versus trying to stick it out on her own. So again, I thought it was fun because they hadn't made that agreement, even private, for her to use that situation to make it public, to ensure it happens. And lastly, we've already seen that Viserys loves that shit. What I mean is, like, remember a couple episodes ago, whenever Rhaenyra offers one of the dragon eggs and to combine the Hightower and Rhaenyra Targaryen houses, he was like, it's a great gesture. So again, I think it's a little bit of Rhaenys knowing the audience that she's having to sway. It's a fundamentally different goal she's trying to achieve there, and in a different way to communicate it as well. Okay, we got to talk about Daemon, and really Daemon didn't. I have it listed here as use it to his advantage, but let's be honest. How did Daemon get the satisfaction out of this scene? Because this was A+ material right here. Chad, what was your take on Daemon just sort of goading this guy into calling them bastards? And worse than calling them bastards, I think, was the fact that he called his wife a whore. What were your thoughts? Were you expecting that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it just shows the strength of, like, Daemon and Rhaenyra know how to play the game. Like, this is his checkmate move. Like, he knows how his brother feels. His brother believes that this is something that should be put to bed. He knows that Vaemond is a hothead. He's getting, he sees it here. Right? Like, Daemon would be a master poker player. Like, he's that good at reading people, and this is his checkmate move. And as we were reminded last week, Velaryon steel cuts cleanly, and Daemon is one of the few people that not only has but regularly carries a Velaryon sword everywhere he goes. And so, as soon as, I wouldn't be surprised if as soon as, Viserys is walking in the room, Daemon knows, like, he's thinking 7 moves ahead, and he knows how this is going to play out and where this will end today.
Yeah, it was very well played. Timing was impeccable there. Daniel, any thoughts on how Daemon capitalizes on the situation?
Daemon's had an interesting arc for me. Like, he starts off the entire show by, like, castrating a bunch of people and, like, doing a bunch of, like, terrible things. And so you're like, oh, this is the villain. And then, like, he goes through this, like, really weird arc to where now he's, like, maybe one of my favorite characters. And Obviously, that has a lot to do with Matt Smith's performance, of course. But I find myself like actually really rooting for Daemon now. Family has always been really important to the Targaryens. He was just looking for a reason to take his head off. He found it. He even like, sort of the way that he even goads him. He's like, just can't wait to get to that moment when he says like, say it, he wants him to say it. I really appreciate the way that Daemon's willing to, stick up for his family.
I just think it's one of those things. He was just waiting. He just wanted to pressure that guy into messing up. And he knew the second that Viserys gave him the permission, not verbally give him the direct permission, he said, take his tongue. He's like, all right, this guy's done. Like it. And it was a very great moment for him because again, it reveals more about his character, which is he will create scenarios where he has the upper hand. He's not afraid to manipulate the room. And he knows how to work the room as well. Just great moment overall. Just really quickly, I wanted to get your take here. After this is all done, we get to the dinner. But before the dinner, there's actually this really strange scene that we have with Rhaenys as she watches over the preparation of Vaemond's body before it's sent back to Driftmark. I'm just curious. Again, Daniel, I asked this question between you, Brock, and Lacey, and myself last week. We're spending a lot of time with Rhaenys and Corlys in previous episodes. We have like a lot of these like one-off scenes where you're like, okay, well, they're including this for a reason. And we get some great writing out of it, but why? And it's becoming pretty clear to me that Rhaenys is going to have a much larger role to play in the future. I don't know what that looks like. But any idea about why they may have included this scene where she's overlooking her dead brother-in-law's body?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this, there was a couple of things that come to mind. I do think it's interesting that they included it. But as I just mentioned, Rhaenys is really a tragic character at this point. Like she's lost almost everyone in her life, all of her children. She's about potentially, to lose her husband. She was denied being the queen when it seems like clearly she would have been the better option. Yeah, I think it's just a really, really sad story. But as you said, clearly that she has some sort of bigger purpose coming. I also wonder, her words end up what start changing the prospect in that room or whatever. So I wonder if that's on her mind at all, seeing like this is her husband's, brother. So, or her brother-in-law, I guess. Right. So, I wonder if she has just a sense of like someone needs to be here to honor his death or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what her motivation is, but again, like you said, there's clearly something she's going to play a bigger role, and I'm not sure what that is yet.
Chad, did you have any ideas or thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I think one, it's just world building, right? We get the same thing last week when we get what's her name? When we get the death scene, we see the Laenor's sister, Laena. Sorry,
Laena. Yeah.
Total, but yeah. When we get the whole thing of like how they push the tomb like out into the sea. I feel like we've just had a lot of like death rituals kind of hang over our head, right? So we see Laena actually die by dragon fire, then we see how her casket, is thrown into the sea. Here we see like the body being prepared. So I think there's just a lot of world building. I think it also is just, again, knowing, more signs that this is the episode where Viserys will die, right? We're getting this. She gets that line where like she's right, something about the stranger, right? Like she's seen enough of the stranger, or again, this kind of reference to the seven. I think like a couple of things that we get, like it's just they want us to like live and they want us to make this world feel more real. And so we get these kind of, what is the death ritual here? I think, right, it parallels, I know other religion, like, Judaism has this idea of like someone needs to watch over the body while it's being prepared, and right, you don't leave the casket alone and things like that. So I think it's more of that of like, while she disagreed with Vaemond's, final decisions and the way that he acted, right, again, it comes back to like family is important and there's no one else here. Are we led? I mean, I guess we don't know, or we've never told. Does he not get married? Does he not have kids of his own? Do we like, is there?
I don't think they showed us any, because he himself is only in a handful of scenes. I mean, I know we saw him at the battle in the fourth episode.
So to me, I think it's just like, look, there's, she's the only family he's got. And so she, again, once again, Rhaenys has to do her duty, right? She has to play the role that she's been given. And, this is what, someone should be doing is kind of being there while the body's being prepared. So I think, again, it has more to do with showing the character of Rhaenys. Again, there's a lot of not only world building, but character building throughout this episode. And so, but I totally agree. Like, I think, we're about to get something. We're going to see more payoff from Rhaenys in some way.
I think I agree with everything the two of you have said. The only thing I'd like to add is that is a great way to get out of an awkward family dinner. The whole family's going to be there. I'd rather look at this corpse than go to that dinner, because I'm sure she understands just how awkward that dinner is going to be. So with that in mind, as we mentioned earlier, Viserys requested everyone in the family sits down together for dinner. And this is his, as I mentioned a while ago, this is his Hail Mary at trying to forge peace one last time while he's still alive. And, I just have to say, this was an incredible sequence, just overall. It was emotionally moving. You got to see the best and worst sides of both of these families. Interestingly enough, we'll get to, I want to dive a little deeper into this here in a moment. Interestingly enough, I thought the best parts of the sequences were Rhaenyra and Alicent and their generation, Daemon, that first group we had come up, where the worst side was their kids, kind of bringing up all of this old bad blood that they had between families that ends up being really what kind of takes away from what was a really poignant dinner. We got some great moments here, though. Rhaenyra raises a glass to Alicent, really thanking her for taking care of Viserys. I thought that was really moving because we forget, even though, again, this is just my take, maybe I'm reading this differently than others, but I feel like they've really positioned Rhaenyra to be largely the main protagonist. We don't see all of that time Alicent spending with Viserys while he's slowly deteriorating away. We get little bits of it. There was a scene where I think it was episode 4 when we see them in bed together, and you can see how miserable Alicent is in that scenario. And you have to think all of this just to play the keeper for him for all of these years, and for that to be acknowledged by Rhaenyra, I thought was really touching, and it's something that I think we should remember as an audience, even if we don't like the Hightowers and we don't like Alicent, she did have to put up with a lot of stuff and had to take care of a lot of Viserys's bullshit, for lack of a better word. Whether it was his health, whether it was his lack of decision making, she had to take care of him through it all. So I thought I was moved when she raised that. I was like, oh, that's such a sweet gesture. And then for Alicent to throw that back at her, going as far as to saying you'll be a great queen, I was almost taken off guard. Again, just genuinely moved by the speeches. It seems, though, that the Hightower children and Rhaenyra's children don't have that same level of respect in their speeches that they share. But first, I just want to get you all's take. Daniel, I'll start with you. How did these two speeches between Alicent and Rhaenyra resonate with you?
I thought it was great, and I think that I believed them. I felt like they were both able to find a genuine way to connect, and I think that we're likely not to see that again. But I still think in that moment they were able to do what Viserys was asking of them. They were able to provide that for Viserys. I think they all know that his death is coming, and so I think that they really do try to give him the dinner that he wants. And, it's interesting also that they're the two women at the table as well. And they're able to kind of have that sort of power at the table when, no one else is really able to do that. It seems much deeper rooted for the kids, which is interesting because they don't have the context that Rhaenyra and Alicent do. But it was really touching to me to get to that point where they could show some respect for each other, because I felt like their relationship, going back again to the beginning of the season, there was such hope and that they could have been like such a powerful duo. I'm glad that even though I know it's going to be short-lived, that they were able to find just this brief moment and we were able to see that again. I
think Alicent's the one who says this in her speech. At least recognize that they have more in common than they like to admit, than they openly admit, I think was especially notable. Chad, what did you make about these two speeches?
Yeah, again, Rhaenyra being the first one to step up, the first one to, show some empathy. Again, shows that she's just so much more well prepared for the role that she believes, she needs to play. And I think I think, Alicent's is earnest. I think we get a glimpse of the future that could have been if Daemon had, taken Otto's head off 20 years ago, or if, Viserys had listened to everyone else that told him, of that he should have been the one to marry Lena. We get a very different version of what this is, right? A lot of this comes down to Alicent believing, having her father in her ear, believing that if Rhaenyra is made queen, that she would want her children to die. And I think everything that we've been led to believe is like, that's not actually the case. Like, if Rhaenyra is made queen today, they are more than welcome. Like, she would love nothing than to have, more dragons in the keep and whatever else. And so, I think we get this glimpse of a possible future that we know is unlikely, or that is not to come particularly from Alicent's speech. Again, I think they're doing double duty here of, where the Hightower kids are the ones that are shittier than the strong boys, and Daemon's daughters. I like they are actually trying to take it somewhat seriously. I think, Aemond and Aegon in particular, right, have heard a lot more probably vitriol from their mother as well as their grandfather, right? And I think they've been exposed to a lot more of the whispers and things like that.
And I think the one other thing I'd add to that is, not only there's a couple of different forms of resentment that I really see Alicent having towards Rhaenyra. One is, yes, the actual real fear that because of what her father's told her, there will be a war, your children's lives will be in danger, they aren't legit kids anyway, right? So there's those things are all like one stream of resentment. But I also think there's this really deep-rooted resentment from Alicent that Rhaenyra has lived her life as a quote-unquote harlot, doing what she wanted, not playing by the rules, paving her own way, whereas Alicent has had to sort of set aside any ambitions or dreams that she may have had in order to fall in line with what her father imposed upon her as she grew up. And it just goes to show like how hard it was for her to even say those kind words that publicly in front of everyone. It was really, really moving. Maybe Alicent thinking back to their happier memories as children, comparing to, again, that next generation, the Strong Boys and the Hightower kids. I kind of look at this as sort of this feud is sort of a disease, and it spans multiple generations. And assuming there are more generations to come, these family squabbles we have quickly over generation to generation that pass down turn into wars and battles and different tribes. I just love the little details they show. How what triggers Aemon, for example, is whenever he sees, I think it was Viserys, but one of the other strong kids just chuckle when a pig gets sat down in front of him, bringing back this one time where he felt like vulnerable and tricked by the pig is the dragon moment. And he uses that as his opportunity to sort of try to take them down a peg and really upsets the entire dinner, notably after Viserys has left the room, of course. Daniel, I mean, how do you think this show is speaking to sort of that disease of this multi-generational family feud? Any other thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that kind of like what we talked about, especially I think, going back to what Chad said with Alicent and the way that she has talked about Rhaenyra's children, probably behind doors and stuff like that, has really instilled a sense of resentment in them as well. I mean, we have like real life stories of family feuds, over land or whatever. And over this, it's just over the children's heritage. Right. So, I think that especially, with even looking farther than that with Otto being behind, we saw the way that he was reacting to Aemond getting the dragon last week. Right. So he's probably also been these last 6 years, pulling him under his wing and speaking a lot of things to him as well, too. So, yeah, I think, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And even though they're It's like these 5 minutes of calm. It's just, about to be like what we've said before, like the explosion is about to come.
Yeah, it's just it highlights the tragedy, and Chad, I really like how you laid out there that it's the future that could have been, that we'll almost certainly never see any of. Before we get to Viserys' death here, I did want to note, just generally, incredible speech from Viserys to his family before the other two speeches. Just want to note that was really really moving. Also, makeup, VFX work. I don't know if you guys watched after the episode airs, they have the short 7-minute making of documentary that airs, but there's also an in-depth 25-minute version that you can access on HBO Max. And they went to great lengths to make him look as awful and terrifying and morbid, is probably a better word than terrifying, morbid as possible. Chad, anything you want to add about Viserys before we get to his death scene here?
Yeah, I thought they did a really good job, taking the Phantom of the Opera mask off. He's got a little bit of Voldemort in the Goblet of Fire, esque kind of look to him. I think the stuff when it was just his face worked really well. I think that other one when he's sitting up without the top, and it that didn't look as good. But all in all, I think they did a really good job just showing how much this disease has eaten away at him. Again, stellar performance of that speech. And again, I truly believe going back to the speeches, his speech out the three, the Alicent, Viserys, and Rhaenyra, this is the most earnest that we've seen out of them probably since the first episode. He truly believes that this family could be saved, right? And they're on the precipice, and again, there's a future that could have played out very differently, where if those words were truly his last, maybe we wouldn't see. That said, if we get the future that could have been, we probably wouldn't be watching that, because this wouldn't be a TV show. Yeah.
Bring us the Dance of Dragons. That's what we signed up for.
Exactly. We want, if this was another 100 years of peace and prosperity, we would have glanced over it just as much as we did, the previous generation, where we would have gotten, the 30-second recap at the beginning of the episode.
Wait, Chad, I watched 8 episodes. The 10-episode season turns out to just be a one-off season where it all ends and they're all holding hands and singing Kumbaya.
Yeah.
Oh, that's lazy writing. It's terrible.
Some of us would love that. But yeah, we would not be watching this story if that was the case, for sure.
Daniel, any other thoughts on Viserys, whether it's his speech or maybe his Gus Fring look that he's wearing during dinner?
Yeah, he looked really rough. When I saw it, I was like, I don't know if I've ever seen, an older guy look that rough on, any movie or TV show I've ever seen. They really made him look morbid, I think was a good word. I don't know exactly how they did it. I don't know how much it was practical or, or whatever, but looked really great. I thought they did a fantastic job with that.
I mean, we're calling him old. Do you guys know how quote unquote old he actually is?
I actually don't know. Do you?
He is 52.
Oh gosh.
And again, so compare that to Daemon. Daemon is what? I think 3 years younger. Daemon is still in his prime. He's assume he's 40. So it is advanced old age because of, ultimately because of the throne.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It was in contrast, it feels like Daemon hasn't aged a single day since the beginning of this, even though it's been 20 years or whatever it's been. So,
well, and Otto Hightower still looking great as well. He looks basically the same as he did 20 years before. No, I think, Chad, I'm really glad you pointed that out, because this guy, his life ends prematurely. The throne did not deem him worthy to be sat on.
For sure, yeah.
Before we get to the actual final moment here, random scene. This one caught me way off guard, and I still don't know what it means, which is why I'm here to talk about it with you, gentlemen. And that is Mysaria. That's right. Daemon's, I don't know what you call her, partner, who worked in the brothel. She's back with the weird accent that we made fun of in the first 2 episodes. Yeah, she's back suddenly. And all we get is a scene where another woman, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we recognize her either. We do. Okay, wait, Chad, who is this that she is speaking with?
That is Talia. You have seen her in the background of a lot of places. In this episode, I know we definitely saw her. She is actually in the room when Alicent is talking to the young woman that was assaulted by Aegon. And she is the one that ultimately brings the moon tea to her afterwards, right? So I think here the key is that Mysaria has at least one, if not multiple, sources inside of the keep. And we didn't talk about that scene either, but I do. We rewind to a couple episodes ago, and it was like the Grand Maester was the one that brought that tea to Rhaenyra, right? Because and as I understand it, was like very difficult to brew, and like only it took a lot of and now it's like, I mean, to me that just shows like this is probably not the first problem that Aegon has gotten himself into, if the point like where there's like one of the servant girls is now bringing like the Plan B tea to her here. There it seems like maybe there's a stash of this laying around. But yeah, that is Talia. She is, I believe we have also seen her in kind of the background. If she has been in other episodes, I think this is one of those like previous Leons. We could probably, I imagine by now someone has done the cut of like she is probably in a bunch of scenes. She might have even been at the wedding. Or the engagement dinner. I don't know. I'm sure we've seen her like around a bunch. And this is to show us, I think, just this connects well with what we saw Larys last week, right? Where there are at least 2 people that are building a network of folks that are acquiring knowledge.
Yeah. No, I thank you. Firstly, thank you for laying that out, because my take was the scene is treating it like I should know who that is, and I was like, she looks familiar, but I don't know who she is. So thank you for giving me that download, Daniel.
Yeah, I think the networking thing is what's interesting here, because it seems like she's going to maybe be important later. Have no idea how or why, but she is definitely going to be someone who's going to potentially pop up with a lot of information that people didn't know that she had access to.
Well, I mean, how can we forget that Mysaria, I mean, she was literally in bed. She went to Dragonstone with Daemon. I want to reiterate, I think I said this sometime in the last 2 podcasts, I have been totally misreading Daemon for the first half of the season. I thought all these moves were very conniving, not to repeat myself too much. He had been scheming and setting up this big master plan, when in reality, we'll see where this goes. But my take on that scene now, looking back on it, is Daemon had nothing to do with that sharing of information. It was actually Mysaria who was the one who was pushing that information along, who had another ulterior motive there. That, again, love it, because it is me as a male viewer underestimating the fact that this Mysaria character that we in fact made fun of in the first 2 episodes because of her accent could in fact be a key player in the things to come. Kudos to the show for kind of laying that track and putting it out there. We'll see if it pays off. It does lead to me to the big question I have is, why introduce her at this point, right before the shit hits the fan? Any thoughts? Any ideas? Who's she going to back? I don't know.
I mean, right. Wars are won by knowledge. And so, again, I think, as we're putting the pieces on the board, like I said, you've got Larys in the corner of Alicent. They are going to need a master of whispers to back Rhaenyra and Daemon. And so that my guess is that is where she will land. Whether we can trust them, whether they have enough money to pay her. I mean, she's giving off Littlefinger vibes again. Who knows? right? We still have no idea how ultimately the dagger actually ends up further down the line into Littlefinger's hands. But is she actually somehow the prototype for what Littlefinger will become, which is, yes, I own brothels, but the money I actually make is made in whispers. It's not actually in the sex trade. And that seems to be what they're setting up with her.
I think that takes us again to the final scene here, which is Viserys' death. Very dramatic, very epic. I know in the making of, they were very proud of it because they built this whole crane so they could get this awesome wide shot where they go in through these chambers. I don't know. They were very proud of it. It did, in fact, look very cool. I watched for it on the second viewing.
And well lit, I will say. It was actually...
You could see it.
The bedroom was very, the fact that it is still in dark, but you can actually see what was going on there. I actually thought we were going to get some type of supernatural. There's at one point a light seems to hit Viserys in a different way, and I actually thought we were going to get, I don't know. So I thought something was going to happen because the light seemed to shift on him while he was in bed. But maybe we can talk a little bit. Maybe something actually did happen.
I was just gonna say maybe something did happen because he's so sort of my take here is Chad, I love the supernatural because I hadn't even considered it, but I do think this is fantasy after all, so it's not out of the question a real possibility by any means. My take was that we'd seen Rhaenyra in the earlier scene sort of pleading with him for his help, and she was talking about the prophecy, and my take was that he was sort of picking up on that same conversation on his end because he wasn't very responsive when Rhaenyra was trying to talk to him. And instead of, delivering that information to Rhaenyra, he was delivering it to Alicent, who apparently, kudos to Viserys. He kept his word. He didn't share that information with anyone who wasn't the heir, apparently. So Alicent had no idea what he was talking about and decided to cherry pick the phrases she understood. And I mean, we'll see, but I'm pretty sure she's going to use those words to her benefit in the next episode as, oh, you said the words Aegon, Prince Aegon should be the heir. Yeah. I that's my guess on what we're gonna see happen in the next episode, which is going to be where the war really kicks in. But I don't know, Daniel, what did you think?
Yeah, that was my take as well. That he thinks that he's talking to Rhaenyra in that moment. As far as what she's going to do with the information, I think we're being shown that scene for a reason, right? So she's going to be using it for something, but I feel like she doesn't have, she's kind of in a hard spot because no one else witnesses him saying that, right? It's one of those things where of course she's going to say that, right? So I don't know how believable her, oh, he told me right before he died that this is what he wanted. It seems very convenient to everybody else, right? So I don't know how much power she actually has. I mean, I would have expected maybe her to say stuff like that without him saying this. So I don't know, that part was interesting. I don't know how she's going to maneuver that particular element of it, because I think it would be way too convenient for her to just come out and be like, oh, by the way, right before he died, he said that Prince Aegon's the king. Sorry, Rhaenyra. And then it's just going to go over smoothly, right? I get maybe that, that we've been saying there's going to be a war. So I don't know, but it was really sad to see him again, we've talked about his performance. He feels like he's in so much pain the whole episode. It's really hard to watch by the end of it. So kudos to the performance. I think that it was really sold. I didn't get any supernatural or vibes necessarily, but just that he was just out of it and confused. And in his final moments, what he's thinking about is I have to get the heir this, because we've talked about how he believes in the prophecies and the visions. And so in his final moments, he is the most concerned with making sure that Rhaenyra is ready to make sure that prophecy is understood and comes to fruition. It's just not Rhaenyra that he's talking to.
Tells you a lot about his values. Chad, any thoughts on these final words, what they mean and how Alicent will use them?
I mean, I think it's we'll have to see how it plays out, whether she truly believes that this is, Viserys kind of on his deathbed, telling her that Aegon is actually the one that should be, or, is this, does she relay it to her father, who, kind of is the one that sets the table for this. And again, it goes back to, this precedent of Corlys's wife knowing his final, opinion on who should be his heir, right? Like this sets it up for, it's like, oh, the same way, like, on his deathbed, he changed his mind, and it should be my son Aegon. I get it. I don't know if Alicent will actually believe that or not. I think that's TBD. And then we do get this kind of, these final breaths, and then, he says, and I rewound it and I put the captions on. I don't normally watch it with captions, but he does, his last words are "my love." He's got this kind of, he's reaching, he seems to be reaching. So again, maybe there is, I don't know who you guys think he's talking to. I believe it's Emma, his first wife, who again, if we were to believe, is somehow, welcoming him to the afterlife. I think there's probably a case to be made for Rhaenyra, maybe even Alicent, but I like to think that his one and actually only true love is his first wife.
My take is he's talking to Rhaenyra. He is talking to Rhaenyra the whole time, but his dying words are "my love," as in, and I tend to agree that he is entering through the other side to meet his dead wife, because that's the thing. Though he has a certain amount of respect and duty to Alicent, you never really feel the romantic sparks. I got to say, it's a big kudos to them for doing a great job in the first half of the first episode for, really setting it up for us to buy that relationship, because it doesn't, saying that to Alicent just doesn't ring totally authentic to what we've seen of him so far. So I tend to agree with you on that one, Chad. Daniel, his love, who's he talking about?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And he's even talked about how, I can't remember exactly what episode it's in, but how Rhaenyra resembles her, and he's thought about her, Rhaenyra, in that way, and that seems to be why he has such a love for Rhaenyra over his other children. Yeah, I think that's probably where his thoughts are in his final moment, and it makes sense because, like I said, I was kind of with you, Caleb. I think he thinks he's talking about Rhaenyra, and then that's an easy transition because Rhaenyra reminds him so much of his wife that he's able to then transition into that as his final words.
It's tough to make heads or tails out of a man's dying words, but there you have it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is our discussion covering this week's episode, The Lord of the Tides. Hopefully, if you have questions, you'll shoot us an email at castbeyondthewall@live.com. But as a part of a new segment this season, we are going to conclude the episode by awarding honors to various characters in the episode. And as always, we'll do who wins, who loses, and who is the biggest wild card. And I'll throw out a special award. And special award is welcome to other co-hosts if they have any written down. Chad, our guest for the week, I'll start with you. Who is this week's winner, this week's loser, and this week's wild card?
So winner, I'm giving to Mysaria. Now that we've seen that, I think she's going to be the ultimate winner here, trading in information. This week's loser, we got to give it to Vaemond. He got outplayed. And wild card. Who am I going to give the wild card to? I think it's got to go to Princess Rhaenys. I think she continues to be the X factor. She swayed it in a way that maybe we didn't see coming. So I think she takes down the wild card.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. I think that those are all great picks. Mysaria for this week's winner, though, that's a big one. Daniel Stoll.
Yeah, I went a little bit of a different route. I actually went with Rhaenyra as the winner. I think getting Rhaenys on her side is going to be a pretty big boon for her later down the road. And for this week's loser, I went with Viserys. I think it's really heartbreaking having to watch him struggle, despite how frustrated I was with him this entire show about not making choices or decisions or anything. He did love his family, and it's really heartbreaking that he could, he did have that moment, but he wasn't able to fully get his family in the position that he wants. For this week's wildcard, I went with Vaemond, actually. I think that he is definitely one that we need to be looking out for. I think that I mean, just the way that he even couldn't even make it through the dinner without making a mention of the Strong Boys. I think that he's going to be someone that we should keep an eye on him. And then I actually have a special award this week, and I'm giving the episode the special award of roughest looking man on TV. Like I said, I don't think I've ever seen anyone look that rough on television, and so I think this episode gets that reward.
Oh, do I get to give a special award too?
Yeah, you can give one as well, Chad. Go for it.
I'm gonna give the award the I can't believe he went out like that award to the sea snake. To your point earlier, we get some of these other like weird, interesting side things, and to like kill that dude off camera, and like we don't even get to see it. We don't now. We maybe we see him die in agony. I don't know, like in the future, but that seems to be like for us to not get that battle that he's in. They've got all these ships. I don't know, like to take him out off screen. That deserves a special award.
Off-screen deaths of main characters seems awfully cruel, especially in a Game of Thrones sort of environment. But it's part of what they do. In this show, they time jump, they skip really seemingly pivotal scenes to get to the good stuff, or quote unquote important stuff. All right, so this week's winner, I am actually gonna go Rhaenyra as well, mostly because they were able to defend their claim. Her kids are going to marry back into Rhaenys, and I think that's a win. I honestly, if I could give it an award to two of them, I would also include Rhaenys in here because she is also able to defend her position as well. But by siding with Rhaenyra, she's able to defend her position. So I think they both come out on top this week. This week's loser, yeah, Daniel, I'll go with you. Viserys, guy's dead. It's really sad. Corlys as well, but we didn't see him die a slow, painful, agonizing death. Maybe that makes him the biggest loser of all. He wasn't even important enough to get a death scene. Yikes. This week's wild card is Mysaria. Now, Chad, I think it was great that you put her as the winner. I think that's a bold choice. I honestly would assume she is winning because we haven't heard about how much winning she is doing. That said, I have a hard time embracing her as the winner until I have more details. So for that, I will give her the wild card, and I really look forward to seeing, hopefully in the next episode, what exactly she's been up to.
Totally fair. I figured that those that's how you guys were going to play it out. I just wanted to have a little bit of a different take. I think in the long run, right, this is where Mysaria ends up on the winning side, which is to say that I think there's no way that Alicent and Rhaenyra are both losers ultimately in the game, and someone like Mysaria is the only one that is actually positioning herself to come out unscathed on the other side.
I do think I love the Baelish parallel. I am, in fact, a Baelish fan. Despite him being an awful human, but guy knows how to play the game really well. So I got to admire game, and I think Mysaria definitely seems to be taking that same strategy that you laid out. My special award for the week is a character most likely to appear in the next Dragon Ball Z movie, going to Vaemond Targaryen. I think he's going to ride in on the dragon, and I feel like you could just copy and paste him, and give him the anime filter, and there he is. He fits right in with the group.
How many levels of Super Saiyan you think Vaemond can achieve?
Well, he's got pretty long hair, so and he's battled and trained quite a bit, so at least like level 3, right? At least.
That's fair.
Yeah, 3. Okay. Daniel's nodding his head. I'll take that as an agreement.
He got there pretty fast. I'll say that.
Well, when time jumps are a factor, anything.
True.
Yeah. I mean, he's the only one. He looks a lot older. He could have got into one of those chambers where like he lives a year in one day. That's the only explanation for the fact that he seems 8 years older than his older brother at this point.
I didn't mention that. That's a good note. I did think about that when we were watching. I was like, how is it that Vaemond now looks significantly older than his older brother Aegon? Aegon, who somehow almost looks younger than he did last time. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is our review and deep dive into season 1, episode 8 of House of the Dragon, The Lords of the Tides. We are out of time, so we won't spend too much more time on predictions, but I will say the next episode, the infamous episode 9 of House of the Dragon, is titled The Green Council, and it seems Like, we are definitely primed to do a very traditional Game of Thrones episode 9, where it seems like there could be a bloodbath on the horizon, but I don't know, maybe they'll mix it up and it won't happen until episode 10. But I do have to say, I know we've gotten dragons here and there, but this, I don't know if you guys know this, they have like $20 million an episode, it was a $200 million budget for the season. And that means it's roughly on average $20 million per episode for 10 episodes. So all I'm saying is they've been saving that budget up. Okay. And I'm confident that we're going to see some big explosions in the next couple weeks. Chad, thank you so much for taking time out of your Monday night to talk about House of the Dragon with us. Where can people keep up with you and your work online?
I'm C. Parisman everywhere. Hit me up, Twitter, Instagram, we're anywhere. I'm pretty easy to find. So, if you want to talk shop, if you want to talk, geekdom, if you need some, Disney vacation planning tips, I'm always happy to help.
All right. Excellent. I not this year, but maybe next year I'm gonna have to hit you up on some of those Disney trip, recommendations. All right, Daniel Stoll, as always, reliable co-host. Where can people keep up with you online if they want to keep talking to you?
Well, I don't have much of an online presence, but if you do want to come say something to me, you can find me on Twitter at Daniel Stoll 23.
And of course, you can follow the Cast Beyond the Wall on Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT, or on Facebook at facebook.com/Cast Beyond the Wall. And as I noted a couple times in the episode, you can reach out to us at any time with your theories, complaints, corrections, ideas, for an opportunity to have those read on the show by sending us an email to castbeyondthewall@live.com. You can also find me if you want to keep up with what I'm doing outside of House of the Dragon. I do have my work over at thecinematropolis.com, where we have roughly 2 podcasts a month on the Cinematic Schematic, where we talk about film. We do film analysis and film discussions. 2 upcoming episodes. I've teased this one, but we do have an Avatar re-release review coming out this next week. And we also have a little highlight reel of 2022's greatest horror movies up until about October 1 to get you in the mood for the spooky season. So you can find all of that over at thecinematropolis.com. I'm also on Twitter tweeting about all the things at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. Thank you so much for tuning into our recap of this week's House of the Dragon. Join us next week when we continue going beyond the wall. And until then, you can keep your ears